Louis Pasteur. You've probably seen his name every time you open a carton of milk. He's one of those giants of science, a name that's basically synonymous with saving lives. But here's the thing. While we all kind of know the name, the real story, the story of his genius, his absolutely fierce ambition, and the controversies that were kept hidden for a century, well, that's way more complex and honestly, way more fascinating than the legend. Okay, let's dive right in.
First, let's start with the icon, the man on the pedestal. In the world of science, Louis Pasteur is pretty much worshipped as one of the founding fathers of microbiology, a true hero of public health. And you can see why. I mean, his public resume is just staggering. We're talking about a French national hero, the father of microbiology, the guy who invented pasteurization, created world-changing vaccines for rabies and anthrax, and he was the man who completely demolished a scientific belief that had been around for centuries.
So let's really look at those triumphs. And we're going to start with the breakthrough that basically challenged the very definition of life itself. So at the time, people believed in this thing called spontaneous generation. And it sounds kind of crazy to us now, but it was mainstream science. It was the idea that life could just, poof, appear out of nowhere from non-living stuff. You know, like maggots suddenly appearing on meat or mice being born from a pile of grain. And the way Pasteur took this idea apart was just beautiful in its simplicity. He used these special swan neck flasks. So he'd boil a broth inside to kill everything, and that curved neck would let air in, but it trapped all the dust and microbes from the outside. And guess what? The broth stayed perfectly clear. But the second he broke off that neck, or just tilted the flask so the broth touched that trapped dust, boom, it immediately got cloudy with life. And Pasteur? Oh, he knew he'd nailed it. He himself declared that the theory of spontaneous generation would never recover from this mortal blow. And he was totally right. He proved that life only comes from other life. And look, this wasn't just some abstract experiment for the textbooks. It laid the groundwork for everything we know about germ theory. He showed that tiny living microbes made wine and beer ferment, and that discovery led him straight to inventing pasteurization, gently heating things up to kill the bad bacteria. This one idea changed food safety forever, and even gave Joseph Lister the key insight he needed to develop antiseptics for surgery. So once you understand that these tiny little germs are the culprits, what's the next logical step? Well, you figure out how to fight them. And that's exactly what Pasteur did. He basically invented the field of immunology by creating the first ever artificial vaccines for horrible diseases like chicken cholera, anthrax, and of course, rabies. So that's the heroic story we all know. The legend. But it isn't the whole story, not even close. For over 100 years, a completely different version of these events was locked away from the entire world. And here's where it gets wild. In a move that's just shocking for a scientist, Pasteur told his family to keep his private lab notebooks a secret, forever. Now, why would a man of science hide his methods, hide his data? It's the one thing you're not supposed to do. And his family listened. For decades, those notebooks were kept under lock and key. It wasn't until 1964 that his last descendant finally donated them, and it took until 1995 for historian Gerald Gysin to finally publish a book about what was inside. And what he found, well, it completely changed how we see Louis Pasteur. Because those notebooks revealed a man driven by this almost bottomless ambition, someone who wasn't above bending the truth or, let's say, borrowing from his rivals to make sure that he was the one who came out on top. Let's just take the biggest bombshell, the famous public trial of his anthrax vaccine. Now, publicly, Pasteur claimed he'd made this revolutionary live vaccine by weakening the bacteria with oxygen. But his private notes, they told a totally different story. He'd actually used a chemically inactivated vaccine, a method that was pioneered by his scientific rival, Henry Toussaint. The public trial was this huge, spectacular success. All the animals he vaccinated lived. He looked like a miracle worker. But he did it using a technique he had actually criticized in public. And in doing so, he stole all the credit and all the glory from his competitor. And it doesn't stop there. The famous case of Joseph Meister, the little boy he treated for rabies, that whole situation was full of ethical red flags. For starters, Pasteur wasn't a licensed doctor. He could have been prosecuted for what he did. In fact, the risk was so great that his closest medical collaborator, Dr. Roux, actually refused to take part. But the notebooks revealed something even bigger. Meister wasn't the first.
Pasteur had already tried his treatment on 2 other people. One of them lived, but the other one died of rabies. So, what do we do with all this? How do you reconcile these 2 images? You've got the public hero, the scientific saint on one hand, and the private, deeply flawed, and ruthlessly ambitious scientist on the other. Well, I think you have to start right here, with this number, millions. Because despite all the deception, despite the ethical shortcuts, the end result is just undeniable. Louis Pasteur's work is credited with saving millions and millions of lives. He built the very foundation of modern medicine.
I mean, his legacy is literally etched onto the map of the world. You can go from Vietnam to Ukraine and just about anywhere in between, and you are going to find streets named in his honor. That's a testament to his global impact.
And of course, it's not just streets. His name lives on through countless hospitals, universities, and research institutes all across the globe, all dedicated to continuing his life's work of fighting disease.
And I think this quote really just says it all. The guy wasn't even a doctor, but you could argue he did more for medicine than any single physician in history. The results? They really do speak for themselves.
Which really leaves us with one last big question. Pasteur was a genius, a savior, and he was also deceptive and ruthlessly ambitious. His story forces us to ask, can we celebrate the incredible achievements of our heroes while also being honest about their very human flaws? It's a question worth thinking about.